This podcast is sponsored by PedTest Australia and Bulk Gym Chalk. If you are looking to make sure that you take care of your health to the full extent when you are using performance-enhancing drugs, go to PedTest Australia on Instagram. And if you want to make sure that you have the best that you need to have when you are training and you need chalk and want to take care of your grip when you are lifting, go to Bulk Gym Chalk on Instagram. I'm Jacob Harris.
And I'm Connor Walsh.
This is All or Nothing, episode 6. And today we're going to be talking about natural solutions. See what I did there?
Yep, I did.
Yeah, there we go. I have done many drugs in my life, almost all of them. But I've never used steroids, and I have wanted to. I still sort of want to, but I probably won't. So when we work together, a lot of the time, I imagine it's probably somewhat annoying because it would be a lot easier sometimes when I'm struggling with something if I just could ingest something that would make it easier. Sometimes I think that. And we've talked about a few different medications and things like that I want to kind of delve into that wouldn't necessarily make me an untested athlete. And a couple of things that may help in terms of focus and mental performance when I'm cutting, because we have lost I think we lost about 11 kilos last time we worked together.
Yep. And
I consult with Connor because I believe that the bigger and the bolder the man, the smarter they are. And so far it seems to be working out with you. And for me, I kind of want to probably start things with L Carnitine because it's probably the one I remember the most about you advising me on and essentially saying that you had other athletes that were natural that were using it.
Yep.
So for the sake of this conversation, we're going to try our best to draw a line between what would be considered natural and the best thing that you can do to improve everything naturally as opposed to using drugs, because that's what we're trying to do. All right. So starting with L Carnitine, I actually have part of it as a question here, which we might get into afterwards. But why would I be able to use that as a natural athlete and it not be considered being unnatural?
Well, it's a dietary amino acid. Would be about as much logic in calling that unnatural as calling a B12 injection would be. It's simply a micronutrient that you're just choosing to administer via an injection. So
same as someone supplementing with leucine or something like that.
Yep.
Mm. So why L Carnitine specifically, and why would I inject it instead of ingesting it orally?
So oral bioavailability has around about 12 to 15% bioavailability. So in terms of a cost management, you're going to be much better bang for your buck injecting it. A secondary reason is, you might get this abbreviation wrong, but I believe it's TMAO, builds up in the stomach, which is caused by a bacteria. And when you ingest large amounts of carnitine, and I believe choline as well, it increases TMAO, which has some toxic impacts. There's a little bit of research that you'll be able to find on PubMed and whatnot. It's TMAO or MAO. And can have some quite ill side effects in terms of the health side of things, whereas you bypass that when you're injecting it due to the 100% bioavailability of the injection.
Interesting. And this would be a similar, you mentioned the size of the needles that you used before for that same thing. Would you be able to use the same sort of thing you mentioned before? Like how big did you say they were?
So with the peptides that we were talking about in the last episode, you'd be using generally a subcut insulin syringe, which is about half an inch in length. With the L Carnitine, you could inject with that as well, but it's typically, if you're getting some of the high concentration injectable preparations at the 500 or 600 milligram per mil, it's extremely thick. So you're going to have a very hard time drawing it up into an insulin syringe with a really thin needle. So how I personally administer my carnitine is I use a 1 mil barrel with a 19 gauge screw on, so you can still draw it through a large thick needle, and then I swap out the 19 gauge drawing needle for a 27 gauge half-inch injecting needle, which is ever so slightly thicker and longer than the subcut insulin syringes, but it's very marginal and still a very, very small syringe.
And like same sort of thing though. You could still inject it in the stomach, or do you specifically prefer another area?
Look, you could administer it in the stomach. However, it's most likely going to cause you a bit of discomfort and some welting. It tends to be quite thick and will kind of just linger. It'll just sit there and you'll have a bit of a welt. I typically recommend shallow intramuscular injections with it. So still go into the muscle, but not necessarily having to go an inch or inch and a quarter deep like you would with most of your other kind of oil-based steroid injections and whatnot.
Interesting. Why would there be a benefit? You know what I do, right? So I typically follow a lot of hypertrophy training, which is such a broad term. By the way, it may be pronounced hypertrophy, but I will never pronounce it that way because it doesn't sound right to me.
Just call it gains.
Gains. Yeah. We'll just call it gains. But if you say hypertrophy, I giggle a little bit. Even if that's correct, I still giggle at it. So I do mainly, if you want to go air quotation marks, bodybuilding. I've taken a slight break due to a muscular tissue issue. I like the way that sounded. But I do normally do jiu-jitsu. I don't mind a bit of running. So I'm never doing anything crazy, but that's the sort of training that I'm doing. Where would you see the benefit for someone like myself? Would you say it would be worth doing?
Yeah, L Carnitine is very versatile. There are quite a few different benefits. The main reason people are going to use L Carnitine is effectively energy system efficiency. It's going to preference fat, or not necessarily preference, but allow fat to be used as an energy source easier. So when you're doing, like, for example, if you're doing a bodybuilding session, you're most likely going to be doing more glycolytic type training during your actual set, where you're using carbohydrates as fuel. But during those rest periods where your heart rate's coming back down, you're hopefully nasal breathing, you're going to be switching more over into that lower intensity or lower requirement for fuel. And during those periods of time, you tend to switch more back over to fat consumption as an energy source. So something like an L Carnitine will make you more efficient at that kind of transfer between energy systems, as well as having a glycogen sparing effect because you are able to more efficiently use fat when you're not needing that really fast kind of production of ATP from glucose.
Interesting. How often would you inject L Carnitine?
You can get really crazy with it. I have some drug tested athletes that are administering multiple times per day that are really trying to push things, trying to get as much as they can out of the product. Most people that I'll put on L Carnitine will just be one pre-workout injection, just because obviously it is an injection still, and I would prefer see it used over a longer period of time than have someone do this really crazy high-frequency injection protocol where they're maybe doing 3 injections a day and then just be sick of it after 3 weeks and not be able to adhere to it. So typically I just do pre-workout, so maybe 5 times a week, about 30 to 45 minutes before training with a carbohydrate rich meal, because it is better uptaken with presence of insulin as well.
And as you're aware, there's no testing for this sort of thing because it is just simply, as you said.
There's no way you could test for it,
Yeah, would never be not allowed in any kind of situation.
Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by PedTest Australia. If you plan on using or are currently using performance-enhancing drugs, it is very important that you make sure you are doing so, having them been tested before you use them or while you are using them, to make sure that you take care of your health. And you can also recommend that the people around you do so as well. Go to PedTest Australia on Instagram to find out more about the details on how you can test your current performance-enhancing drugs that you are using, or you can find out more about testing other compounds or things that you are putting in your body if you would like to make sure that you take care of your health. So I don't want to speed through these, but obviously we've talked about a few, so I kind of want to move on to some of the other ones, because this one's very different than what we're talking about in terms of L Carnitine, because it's not something you get through your diet. But we had mentioned, or you had mentioned, modafinil.
Yep.
And
oh, you mean dietary modafinil? You don't get it yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it'd be interesting if you could. I tell you what, when I have a big enough burger and fries, I could swear there's some in there because I'm fucking ready to be lights out. But it's medication typically prescribed to narcoleptics.
Yep, narcoleptics and sleep apnea and shift work as well.
Mm-hmm. So obviously it sounds strange to take it if I don't have any of those things. But as we know, medication and everything like that isn't necessarily always used by the people that need it. Hashtag Ozempic. But I was like taken back a little bit, and I looked into a little bit. I asked someone else who had used it as well through uni. I'm assuming they wouldn't test for that in most places.
I don't believe it is on. I don't believe it's banned by WADA, but I could be wrong on that. WADA do regulate some of the stimulants. It would be classed as stimulant. I haven't double checked up on it, so I wouldn't give a definitive answer on that.
Is there like you mentioned before when we had spoken about clenbuterol and said that it had like a short window of being able to be tested for. Does modafinil stay in the system for a long time? Do you know?
Look, I've never used it with someone that's required to beat a drug test. I don't particularly associate with that side of things. So I really don't know what the actual testable time for modafinil is, if it is even something that is tested for in a performance-enhancing drug test.
Yeah, just more so curious if you were aware, but why would that be useful? We brought it up in the context of me cutting weight, right? Yep. I started to mention that my energy levels were pretty low, which is normal, right?
Yep, very normal.
So why would it be something you would, once again, given that I'm not trying to even be an athlete, why would you recommend it to someone to use? Because it's obviously something that you're deeming as safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, again, no drug is completely safe and without side effects. There is always a risk for adverse reactions with everything. Modafinil, as your friend would have mentioned at university, that's probably the heaviest use of recreational modafinil is through studying and academic-based use. It has a very strong stimulant effect without overly increasing cardiovascular markers such as blood pressure and heart rate. So some of that central nervous system stimulation is not present that there is with, say, like a caffeine. So you're not going to get as much of the anxiety or, if you're someone who does suffer from high blood pressure, it's going to be less of a concern if adding something like that in. But it has a very, very profound impact on focus and clarity. I do personally like to use it maybe twice a week. I'll use half of modafinil or 100 milligrams, rotated with other nootropics. I save modafinil for my days that I know I have a lot of work to do and I just need to be razor sharp. Generally, computer work, stuff that I'm doing, large day check-ins, for example. And my ability to maintain focus and just work without kind of realizing it. And I think a lot of people that will, if you talk to people that have used it in university, that's kind of one of the most common things you'll hear them say is they could just kind of study without even thinking about it. They'd be there studying for 3 hours and it felt like it was an hour, and they look at the watch and 3 hours have gone past. And obviously, as you mentioned, when dieting, energy levels can dwindle off when you get into the end phases, and work productivity is. I mean, everyone's got to pay the bills. Everyone's got to be able to work. If you can't function properly when you're getting towards the last weeks of a cut, because low calories can be a very good tool to use in this kind of time period to kind of offset some of those, mental deficits that you're getting from the diet in terms of productivity. It does also have a little bit of an appetite suppressant effect to it as well. So obviously that can be useful at the back end of a dieting phase.
Interesting. Yeah, I find it to be an interesting one. I feel like I've heard it in conversations or seen it as a part of things with Adderall and things like that. Obviously American, and I've kind of seen it in those circles. Is there something, you mentioned nootropics?
Yep.
Nootropics, I think the last time I saw them mentioned was in like that new drink that like James Smith brought out or something. I think Chris Williamson and that were like promoting it as well. Like that, it was like this crazy can of, drink that you could have that apparently was a nootropic or it contained them. Yep. I imagine that's probably not the most efficient way to ingest them.
Like, it's a very broad topic.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% familiar with the one that you're talking about, but like it's
just like it's just like any kind of marketable product that they've made a drink out of, right? It's like it's probably pretty broad.
Yep.
It's probably not specifically anything. Neither of us would know, but it was just the one that I remembered.
Yep.
But modafinil was considered a nootropic then, or
Yeah, again, very, very broad class. So nootropics will contain anything from over-the-counter products like alpha GPC, tyrosine, caffeine, and then all the way through to your prescription nootropics. I mean, I guess even dexamphetamine would probably be classed as nootropic, Adderall, modafinil, armodafinil, those type of things as well. You've got stimulating nootropics, you've got calming nootropics. It's a very, very broad topic. So
one of the other ones I mentioned to you, I'm actually trying to think now. I mentioned like a natural one to you. Oh God, what was it? It was like, I'm trying to remember from our conversation the other day. I think you said that you didn't know heaps about it, but I had someone ask about almost like I would put it in the same class as something as like testosterone.
Right.
I'm trying to remember what it was that I asked you about though, and I think it was to do with. I really want to know now because I think it was to do with something really weird and random, and it was like you said that you'd had someone try and use it maybe, or you'd had someone running a natural athlete.
I think this wasn't in regards to Shilajit and.
I wish I'd had it up because we were just
the other testosterone booster, Tongkat Ali, I think.
That's the one, Tongkat Ali, and so I wanted to like Tongkat Ali, the alpha GBC, not that they're the same, but and then like testosterone, ashwagandha. These things obviously got like massive on like TikTok and shit, and they've all had their kind of time in the limelight, and you see them on shelves, and usually they're like fucking $70 a bottle at like. Unnamed supplement mart store. Where's the line of like what you've seen that in terms of would be useful, like out of those? Because obviously some of what's there I believe to be rubbish, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, look, Shilajit and Tongkat Ali, I wouldn't really personally class the nootropic side of things.
Not nootropics, sorry. I just kind of, I'm not really meaning specifically nootropics. I just mean like if we were to cover them in terms of how they would be relevant to myself as a natural athlete or someone else.
Look, I'm not a fan of, this is probably not the answer that you're going to want me to give and everyone's going to want to listen to at home, but I'm not a fan of broad recommendations. Creatine, for example, would be something I would definitely give as a broad recommendation, but most supplements I'm putting in for a specific reason for that specific individual. As you know, I'm really big on blood work. And most of the time when I'm adding a supplement, it is to combat a specific issue or a shortcoming with that client.
I'll try to be more specific with my question, and more so saying that out of those things that I mentioned, do you regard any of them in terms of being useful in the experience you've had with someone else, or the studies that you have made, you may have seen on them?
Ashwagandha, I like in certain cases. I think it's overused. I'm not a fan of its chronic use. There's this big hate on cortisol in the fitness industry right now, and everyone just seems to think that it should always be low, which is not the case. Cortisol is meant to come up and down. Cortisol is meant to be quite high upon waking in order to make you wake up. You don't want low cortisol when you wake up, otherwise you're going to be sluggish and find it really hard to get out of bed. So chronically using some of these supplements like ashwagandha, which modulate cortisol, can lead to issues long term with chronically low cortisol problems. And as I said, there are definitely times where you do want cortisol to be low, but it does need to still be able to get high. So with something like an ashwagandha, I'm not against using it at the back end of, say, a highly stressful training block, or if you're going through a large stressful period at uni or something like that, in order to get a little bit of cortisol modulation and stress relief acutely, but it's not something I particularly like used long term. As far as your Shilajit, Shilajit can be used as a fairly good, almost like a multivitamin. It provides quite a few minerals and vitamins as well. As far as the testosterone boosting side of things, I think most people are better off spending money elsewhere. The particular person that I was talking to you about is a world level cyclist. and is playing for keeps. It's just what he does. He's trying to get absolutely everything out of anything he can do. So we are incorporating them because we did show that he was borderline hypogonad in some of the blood work we ran. So we are incorporating the Shili Jat, Tongkat Ali, and then 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off cycles of D-aspartic acid to try and bring his testosterone levels up a little bit. I should actually get some blood work back on that this week to kind of see how we're going with that. So next time we're in, I might be able to report on some of those results. However, as I said, I don't think most people are going to see a huge bang for buck going the testosterone increasing route, especially if we're coming at it from like a muscle building perspective. You're probably not going to get a huge amount of extra muscle built taking your testosterone from 20 millimole to 23 millimole. But, you know, if you've got money to spend and you're just trying to be the absolute best that you can, it could probably have a small impact. But, you know, something like a creatine or a good multivitamin is probably going to have a more of an impact than a testosterone boosting product.
This podcast is sponsored by Bulk Gym Chalk. Do you struggle to hold onto your deadlifts? If so, it can be very important to make sure that you have good quality chalk and access to that chalk. So go to Bulk Gym Chalk. You can find them on Instagram and get yourself some good quality chalk so that you can make sure that you can train in the gym and get the best out of your training while doing so. So there's a lot to take in there. I have a whole online cart filled with Tongkat Ali and everything right now, and it's I might as well, you know, for the extra 0.0001%. Better not address my sleep, keep sleeping for 6.5 hours and just take some subs.
Yeah,
I like it because it's just comes down to the simple stuff as always, man. There's lots of testosterone boosting talk now.
Yep.
And ashwagandha was a funny one, the way people would talk about it, like you would almost take it and become like Andrew Tate and ignored your girlfriend and she said she loved you and you were too focused on making money and like as if it was this massive changer. And I always found it pretty funny. I don't even personally take creatine, not because I don't want an extra 1%. To me, it's just something that I don't currently do and everything's traveling fine in terms of what I believe that it can add. And that's what I kind of wanted to cover here. It's more about what can you do naturally to just get what you can out of what you're doing and at what point do you need to consider adding more in because something's wrong. As you said, a supplement should be added for a reason. If I have no issue with vitamin D, there's no reason to consider supplementing it. More isn't just better because it's more. And I think that's a reason I really wanted to cover the natural side of things, and I think we'll come back to it because there's even more of it now. I wanted to ask before we finish with this one, I remember Chris Williamson talking about something to do with, and I mentioned it to you once actually, boron. It's like a heavy metal, it's something like that. And he was talking about magnesium with that. And people kind of mention things like this, right, where they increase certain nutrients. There's lots of skinny dudes with their shirts off now talking about eggs and steak. Yeah. We're going to address that.
Don't stop me there, Jacob. We will end up on a tangent.
We are going to address that in the next one, don't worry. Talking about boosting natural testosterone, as a finisher, what are your thoughts on, obviously you're trying it with someone, but overall, what do you believe is the real kind of overall outcome of the ability to do that, like, and people's kind of constant fascination with it? From my understanding, you think it's over focused on and think that it's just something that essentially people attribute way too many things to. And I believe I have started to feel the same but I contacted you recently about some feelings I was having and how I was going about things personally. And you would basically talked about how testosterone wasn't maybe a factor.
Yep.
Do you really think it's something that we can manipulate that much naturally? Or do you think it's as simple as sleeping enough and getting efficient nutrition and obviously training helps? Do you really think there's that much more to it in other cases? Or do you think it is as simple as like those things? And do you really think it's something that we can ever try to change naturally? And do you think it's something we'll ever really be able to change naturally, no matter how many ice baths or saunas we have?
Look, I think what you've just mentioned covers about 90% of everything. Nutrition, sleep, training, just generally being a healthy person, having a good lifestyle, managing stress. there's definitely, I think, a little bit of wiggle room for some improvements in supplementation, and those people that are really willing to go that extra mile to get every little bit out of it. But I think most people will be disappointed by the amount that they're able to change it, even if doing all the underlying things correct and adding all the supplements in and the new this, the new that. And I think a lot of people do put a little bit too much emphasis on the number. Hormones and the way they act is not just necessarily a serum number in your body. It comes down to the amount of androgen receptors, the efficiency of androgen receptors, things like sex hormone binding globulin, hormone ratios. There's a lot more to it than just testosterone as a number by itself. And I think the big thing is most people purely focus on testosterone as a number in isolation and don't really take into consideration some of the other aspects that may be having an impact in that same area of their life.
I like it. Yep. I would finish it by saying that sleep, in my opinion, seems to be the number one thing that has affected the way I have felt and performed, and I would dare say has had impacts on my testosterone throughout my life. Like, even though I'm very young, I would say there's been periods where I've definitely felt a difference in the way I feel and perform, and it may not have been totally to do with that, but I would say that if there was anything that I would give advice on in terms of not tanking your testosterone, sleep seems to be.
Yep. If I were to put a number one thing, I would probably say sleep would be the highest tier on that tier on the list.
Absolutely. That's what we're going to cover for today in terms of the natural solution, or solutions, if you want to look at it that way. I'm Jacob Harris.
I'm Connor Walsh.
This has been All or Nothing. We will see you on the next one.